Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. To carry on with the special embryology lectures, I'm going to cover today the development of the limbs. I'm Dr. Dalia Saleh, Professor and Head of Anatomy Department at Mansour University. For the development of the limbs, in this diagram, the arrows here points at where the limbs buds will appear. So the upper and lower limbs develop from what is called limb buds. The upper limb bud appears earlier than that of the lower limb bud. The upper limb bud appears at the region between C4 and C1, and the lower bud appears at the region between L2 and S3. And if you remember from the upper and lower limb lectures, these are the areas where you can find the brachial plexus and the sacral plexus. So the limb bud is composed of a core of mesenchyme derived from the lateral plate mesoderm. And by mesenchyme, again, we mean that mesenchymal cells are undifferentiated mesodermal cells. So the core comes from the lateral plate mesoderm. The cells there is called mesenchyme, and this core is covered by a layer of ectoderm. So this is a side view of the embryo one more time, and this is the upper limb bud, and this is the lower limb bud. If we take a section in it, we'll see that it is formed of a core of mesodermal cells or mesenchymal cells and a cover of ectodermal cells. In this section again of the limb, we find an area called the apical ectodermal ridge. Apical ectodermal means that it is at the apex and lies at the ectoderm. It is a ridge at the apex of the ectoderm. So it is a thick ectodermal area at the tip of the limb bud. It stimulates the mesenchymal cells beneath it to divide and form what's called the progress zone, where when it divides, it leads to the limb bud growth. So again, this is the apical ectodermal ridge. It stimulates the underlying mesenchyme to proliferate, and when this mesenchymal cells proliferate, this will lead to elongation or growth of the limb bud. Then what happens to the limb is what's called segmentation. You know that in each limb in our body, either the upper or lower, it forms of segments. We have for example, in the upper limb we have the arm, the forearm, and the head. Also in the lower limb we have the thigh region, the leg, and foot. So there is segmentation of the limb bud, and the first segment to appear or to differentiate is the proximal part of the limb. It begins to differentiate first, followed by its distal part. The distal end of the limb flattens into a paddle-like plate and forms the hand plate or the foot plate. The proximal segment then develop another constriction and form two parts. So the proximal segment, for example, in the upper limb will form the arm and forearm, and also the proximal segment of the lower limb bud will form the thigh and leg. Then let's move to the hand plate or the foot plate, where the fingers appear. So this is the flattened hand plate here, and the first formation of the fingers by the appearance of indentations that appear at the hand plate, and the indentations is where these arrows point at. By the 6th week of development, there is mesenchymal condensation. Again, mesenchyme means mesodermal cells. So there is mesenchymal condensations appear as a digital rays, as is shown in this picture, like this. These are just mesenchymal condensation. By the 7th and 8th weeks of development, the fingers become apparent. With further development, at first there were whips holding these fingers together, but later on these whips will regress and free the fingers from each other. These are the site of the whips holding the fingers together, and when they regress, or disappear, the fingers now are free from each other. Look at this animation, you can see how the fingers are formed. It appears like digital rays, and the whips now disappear and the fingers are freed from each other. What about the foot? Same occurs there. Development of foot is like that of the hand, but it starts about 3 or 4 days later. You can see here the foot plate, and these are the indentations that appear at the foot plate, and then the digital or the tooth rays here where the tooth will be formed. First the tooth were held together by the whips between them, and eventually these whips will regress and the tooth will be separated from each other. What about nails development? First the nails appear as thickenings of the epidermis called the primary nail fields. So this is the picture of the fingers of the hand, and this is the picture of toes of the foot, and this will be the site where the primary nail fields appear, like this. What happens to the nail fields? I said it lies first at the tip of the fingers or toes, but this is not the actual site of the nails in our body now. So what happens that the nail fields migrate dorsally, like this, carrying or dragging their nerve supply along with them. That's why in the upper limb, for example, you can see that the cutaneous innervation of the hand, that the skin over the dorsal aspect of the distal phalanges is like that of the palm of the hand. For example, in the lateral 3.5 fingers come from the median nerve, while that on the dorsum of the hand from the radial nerve, except the skin over the distal phalanges comes also from the median nerve. Same happens in the foot. What about the skeleton of the limbs? The skeleton of the limbs develop from the mesenchymal core. That means that it is mesodermal in origin. This is the mesenchymal stage first. Then what happens is that there is chondrification or transformation of this mesoderm into cartilage. In this process we call it chondrification. It starts around the 5th week of development. Then there is appearance of primary ossification centers which start to appear around the 8th week of development. The development is in proximal-distal direction. Then how the muscles of the limbs develop? The muscles of the limb develop from the lateral region of the somites. We call it the dermomytoma region. To remind you of this part, this is a cross section in an embryo. This is the neural tube. Of course, underneath it lies the notochord, which initiates the formation of the neural tube. And on each side of the notochord and neural tube, the mesoderm is divided into the following regions: the periaxial region, which will give us the somites, then the intermediate region, and the lateral plate region. These are the somites. It divides into two parts: ventromedial and dorsolateral. So the muscles of the limb develop from the lateral region of these somites. These are the dermomytoma regions. Again, this is a section in the limbs. The blue bar here represents the bones or the skeleton and should be covered by the muscles. So the myoblasts here comes from the lateral part of the somites or the dermomytomal part of the somites. Again, in order to understand this picture, this is the neural tube, and on each side of it lies the somites. So the somites here are divided into a lateral portion or dorsolateral portion called the dermomytomal region and ventromedial region called the sclerotomic region. So myoblasts form dorsal and ventral blocks of muscles, as we know as extensors and flexors. Like, for example, in the upper limb, the muscles in front of the humerus are called the flexors, like the biceps and brachialis and so on, and the muscles behind the humerus are called the extensors, like the triceps. So again, this is the limb. This where the bones will be formed. This is the ventral surface of the limb, and this is the dorsal surface of the limb. So myoblasts migrate in the dorsal direction to form the extensors, and in the ventral directions to form the flexor muscles. After that, the motor nerves invade these myoblasts to supply them. So this is the spinal cord, and the nerves come out of it like this, and this is where the limb body is formed. So you can see now how the motor fibers or motor nerves come out of the spinal cord and invade the limb buds to supply these muscles. Next, we have what is called limb rotation, and I need you to understand this because it is sometimes confusing. First, the limbs develop in a coronal plane. For example, like this diagram, of course, this is an adult, but I need you to understand the whole idea. So if you take a section in a person like this, holding his hands at the sides, okay, he is holding his arms at the coronal plane. So if we take a section in him like this, this will be the body, and this is the limb, okay? So first the limb appear or develop in a coronal plane. Here we can see the front or the ventral surface or side of the limb, and here we can see the dorsal surface of the limb. Here the muscles are called flexors, and here the muscles are called extensors. The next rotation, the limb will rotate medially. So now the limb is held in a parasagittal plane. If you remember the planes from your first year introduction book, again, the ventral surface of the limb will be faced medially, while dorsal surface will be in a lateral direction. Then the upper limb rotates in a different way than the lower limb. So the upper limb rotates laterally while the lower limb rotates medially. That's why the flexors of the upper limb are facing forward while the extensors are facing backwards. While here the opposite occurs at the lower limb, the extensors are facing forward while the flexors are facing backward. So you can see that the biceps, the flexor digitorum superficialis profundus and so on lies at the front of the limb, while here we can see the quads or quadriceps, which is the extensor of the knee, and the extensors of the toes and the ankle present here, like tibialis anterior, extensor digitorum, and the other muscles of the leg here are called extensors. So remember, in limb rotation, there are 3 stages. The first stage, the limb develops in a coronal plane, where you can see the front or the ventral surface facing the belly of the embryo, while the dorsal side of the limb facing the back of the embryo. Second stage of rotation, when the limb rotates in a medial direction. Now the 2 ventral surfaces of the limbs facing together, while the extensors facing laterally. And then the third stage of rotation occurs in the limbs but at different directions. The upper limb rotates laterally, so the front or ventral surface with the flexors facing forward and the extensors facing backward, while in the lower limb the rotation occurs in the opposite direction. The lower limb rotates medially, so that the flexors of the lower limb are facing backwards while the extensors are facing forward. Then we will talk a little bit about the anomalies of the limb. And we can summarize the anomalies in the following: either failure of formation of parts of the limbs, or failure of its differentiation, or duplication, or undergrowth. So failure of formation of parts of the limbs, we could have amelia. In amelia, there is one or more extremities are absent. As in this picture, you can see that there is absence of the forelimbs. This anomaly, we call it amelia. The other anomalies is because of the failure of formation of certain parts of the extremities. In this case, we call it meromelia, where the proximal and the middle segments of the limbs are absent. Just the hand or foot are attached directly to the trunk, as in this case. The lower limbs here develop normally, while here in the upper limb there is absence of the proximal segment, and the intermediate segment there is absence of the arm and forearm, and only the hands are attached to the sides of the trunk. In this case we call it meromelia. Also, in failure of formation of certain parts, like congenital absence of radius, the radius does not form, so there will be bowing of the ulna and hand deviation laterally. As in this picture, if you see this side, the arm and the forearm here develops normally, and the hand also. But here the arm develops normally, but in the forearm there is absence of the radius and bowing of the ulna and hand deviation. In its X-ray, okay, you can see that this is the ulna, it is curved like this, bowing, and there is no radius here. Also, in failure of formation of certain parts of the limbs, like this anomaly, which is called lobster or cleft hand or foot, there is failure of formation of the middle metacarpal bone in case of the hand, or middle metatarsal bone in case of the foot. Also, the first and second fingers fuse together, and the fourth and fifth fingers fuse together. So you end up with a hand or foot which looks like a lobster claw, like this. So this is a lobster foot. There is deficiency or lack of formation or lack of development of the third metatarsal bone, fusion between the first and second toes, and fusion between the fourth and fifth toes, and this cleft in the middle gives the foot the shape of a lobster claw. Also, failure of differentiation of certain parts of the limbs, like syndactyly. Syn means together and dactyly means finger. So in case of syndactyly, could be cutaneous syndactyly or osseous syndactyly. Cutaneous means that the fingers are fused by their skin together or soft tissue together, or osseous syndactyly means that the fingers could fuse with each other, even the bones fuse with each other. So in this case, you can see that the fourth and third fingers of the hand are fused together. They could be separated by an operation. Also, in failure of differentiation of parts of the limbs, we have congenital hip dislocation, when there is underdevelopment or maldevelopment of the hip joint. The baby will suffer from abnormality in movement of the hip joint, like lack of abduction. As in this picture, there is underdevelopment of the acetabulum, for example, and there is congenital hip dislocation of the head of the femur away from the acetabulum. And so when the baby try to abduct his thighs, the affected limb, there will be lack of abduction in this affected limb, and should be corrected also surgically. Also, in failure of differentiation of certain parts of the limbs, we could have something called congenital club hand. There is medial deviation or lateral deviation of the hands, like this. And we can call it ulnar deviation or radial deviation of the hands. So the hand or the foot at the end looks like a club. As in this anomaly. This is a congenital club foot. And here there is deviation of the foot towards one side. And these are the methods of its correction. Anomalies related to duplication, as in polydactyly. Poly means multiple, and dactyly means fingers or digits. So polydactyly means extra digit either lies on the medial or the lateral side of the normal digit. As in this picture, you can see duplication of the thumb, like this. And this is the picture after its correction. Also, anomalies could relate to undergrowth of the limbs or the limb parts, as in case of micromelia. Micro means small and melia means limb. So all segments in the limbs are present, but they are short, like this. In this pictures, already the limbs are formed, but they are abnormally short or unusually short. Also, in the undergrowth, we can have this kind of anomaly, which is called brachydactyly, in which the phalanges are abnormally short or unusually short, and that's why we end up with short fingers or toes. As in this diagram, you can see this is the normal skeleton, this is the normal length of the phalanges, but the distal phalanges here are abnormally broad and short, so you end up with fingers which are broad and short, like this. So this is the end of my presentation. I hope you like it, and thanks for listening. Please do not forget to subscribe, like, and share.